What happens when you find yourself stuck in a time loop where a bomb explodes every time until you find the person who planted the bomb? Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we will be watching a science fiction movie called Source Code, where the US Army pilot Colter Stevens gets recruited for a top-secret military operation that enables him to experience the last few minutes in the life of Sean Fentress, a man who died in a commuter train explosion. He is sent into an 8-minute digital recreation of the explosion with the purpose of identifying the mysterious bomber who bombed the train and preventing a series of similar explosions. The movie begins with US Army pilot Captain Colter Stevens waking up on a Metro commuter train. Upon waking, he is startled to see his surroundings in Warsaw, with the lady named Christina Warren sitting opposite him, addressing him as Sean. Stevens tells her that he is unaware of who she is and that his name is not Sean. Moreover, he tells her that he flies helicopters for the US Army in Afghanistan. Christina laughs out at him, leaving him even more confused. Disoriented, he steps out of the train as soon as it reaches its station and is surprised to find out that the train is bound for Chicago. He rushes to the train's bathroom, where he is shocked to see his reflection in the mirror of another man. When he checks his license, he is even more surprised to see that he is a schoolteacher named Sean Fentress. Worried by his odd behavior, Christina approaches him in the bathroom, where Stevens bursts onto her, clarifying that he is not Sean. Christina tries to talk him down, but all of a sudden, the train explodes while passing by another train, killing everyone aboard. The scene cuts to Stevens waking up in a dimly lit capsule with a woman communicating with him through a video screen. She asks Stevens about the explosion, but Stevens is confused and unable to answer. The woman asks him to recall her name, but instead, Stevens recalls that he was on a mission flying and that he woke up on a train. On his insistence to brief him on what's going on, a memory thread is played in the capsule. After listening to the thread, Stevens is able to identify the woman who is Air Force Captain Colleen Goodwin. Colleen tells Stevens that he is on a mission to find the train bomber. When Stevens tells her that he did not see the bomber, she sends him back to the moment he awoke on the train. However, this time around Stevens is aware of the mission, and so he engages with his friend Christina nicely. As soon as the train comes to a stop at the same station, Stevens observes everything with much consideration. As the train leaves for Chicago, he rushes to the bathroom and finds the bomb in a ventilation panel. Believing he is being tested in a simulation, he tries to communicate with Colleen on how to unplug the bomb, but when he does not hear her, he leaves the bomb as it is and returns to the cabin. In the cabin, he asks the passengers to turn off all electronic devices as a precautionary measure. When one passenger defies his orders, Stevens becomes furious and breaks his jaw. Just then, the explosion occurs, and once again, everyone on board dies. Stevens once again wakes up in his real self and asks Colleen to connect him to the commanding officer, but she refuses his request, clarifying that he will have to complete his mission before asking for any other favors. Stevens becomes agitated and repeatedly talks about his mission in Afghanistan, but Colleen doesn't listen to him. Colleen realizes that Stevens is getting irritated and that he should at least be briefed on his current mission. So she informs him that the train explosion actually happened, and that it was probably the first attack of a suspected series. Stevens informs Colleen that he found the bomb in the bathroom's ventilation panel, but did not identify the bomber. Colleen asks him to identify the bomber by getting to know the passengers to narrow down the suspect pool. For the third time, Stevens is sent back 8 minutes before the explosion to identify the bomber. Upon waking up on the train, he asks the train conductor if he noticed anything out of the ordinary. The conductor tells him that everything is normal. Stevens then asks Christina to observe the passengers with him to see what each one is up to. When Stevens sees a guy coming out of the bathroom, he asks Christina if she saw someone else using the bathroom. Christina tells him that he was the one who used the bathroom earlier. Stevens is surprised and starts going through his things to find a clue, but when he does not find anything, he decides to follow the man who used the bathroom. He surprises Christina by kissing her and convinces her to disembark the train so he can follow the suspect. Having Christina wait for him, Stevens follows the suspect to the station's bathroom and keeps observing his activities. As the suspect approaches a bench near the train track, Stevens sits next to him and asks him for his phone. The suspect does not cooperate with Stevens and threatens to call the cops. As Stevens tries to snatch the suspect's briefcase, the train explodes in the distance. In the ensuing struggle, Stevens falls on the train track and ends up getting killed by a passing train. A moment later, he reawakens in his capsule, but unfortunately, the capsule's power supply gets non-functional, and he is unable to communicate with Colleen. Due to extreme cold and lack of oxygen, he starts panicking and tries to get out of the cockpit. On the other side, Colleen and her team start worrying when the connection with Stevens is lost. Her superior, named Dr. Rutledge, orders her to start sending out strings as there is not much they can do from afar. Meanwhile, Stevens finds a toolkit in the capsule and tries using it to break out of the capsule, but to no avail. Eventually, he manages to make the capsule functional and gets connected to Dr. Rutledge. Rutledge calls Colleen and Stevens immediately informs her that he was unable to identify the bomber, but did manage to save a passenger named Christina. Colleen does not appreciate it as she clearly asked Stevens to only focus on his task of identifying the terrorist. However, when Stevens insists that he can save other passengers too, Rutledge tells him that Christina might be saved but only inside the source code. Confused, Stevens asks him what it means, to which Rutledge explains that it is quantum mechanics, a parabolic calculus that is quite complicated to understand. However, upon Stevens' insistence to know the phenomenon, Rutledge elaborates that the source code is an experimental machine that reconstructs the past using the dead passengers' residual collective memories of 8 minutes before their deaths. He also explains that Sean Fentress, who died in the explosion, was the best link as he shared many similarities with Stevens, like gender, body size, and his synaptic maps. Rutledge also tells Stevens that after 8 minutes, he cannot exist inside the source code, making it clear that source code is not time travel but time reassignment that gives access to a parallel reality. Despite Rutledge's explanation, Stevens keeps insisting that Christina must be alive as he saved her. Colleen disregards him and makes it clear that the only thing that matters is finding the bomber to prevent the upcoming second attack in downtown Chicago, where the bomber is planning to detonate a bomb. For the 4th time, Stevens is sent back 8 minutes before the train explosion. He wakes up on the train and rushes to the train's security box. He breaks into the security room and tries to steal a gun, but just then the train security uses an electric taser on him, and he ends up getting a head injury. The security handcuffs him to the train's pole, and Christina insists on taking him to a hospital. On the contrary, Stevens asks her to lend him her phone so he can call his father one last time. Christina is puzzled to see his odd behavior, and just then the explosion occurs once again, killing everyone on board. Upon reawakening in the capsule, Stevens insists Colleen connects him to his father, but she does not comply and sends him back to the source code, while asking him to check the suspect's baggage and look for signs that lead to the bomber. On his next run-in, Stevens asks Christina to search for Captain Coulter Stevens on the internet, and finds out that he was reported as killed in action 2 months earlier. On returning to the capsule, Stevens asks Colleen if he is dead, but she refuses to talk about anything irrelevant other than the terrorist attack. However, upon Stevens' continuous questioning, Colleen reveals that part of his brain is active, and that he is missing most of his body, which happened during one of his missions in Afghanistan. She explains that the capsule and his healthy body are manifestations made by his mind to make sense of the environment. When Stevens asks her where he is, she does not tell him, saying it is classified. This enrages him, and he starts cursing Colleen and Rutledge. Rutledge informs Stevens that the mission is authorized by the military and that there are millions of soldiers dying to serve their country even after death. Moreover, he offers to terminate Stevens after the mission by letting him die, and Stevens accepts the offer. After numerous run-ins, Stevens eventually becomes exhausted and demotivated. Rutledge boosts his morale by playing a recording of his father in the capsule. Encouraged, he goes back into the source code, and this time manages to get the phone plugged into the bomb. The phone leads him to the bomber through a fallen wallet, who turns out to be an adult boy named Derek Frost. In an attempt to interrogate Derek, Stevens jumps out of the moving train and finds a bomb inside Derek's white van. Meanwhile, Christina manages to stop the train and approaches Stevens, but Derek shoots them both. During the last few minutes of the source code, Stevens asks Derek why he has become a bomber, to which Derek says that the world is hell. Stevens reawakens in the capsule and gives Colleen and Rutledge the details of the bomber. In exchange, he requests Rutledge let him get back in the source code so he can save other people on the train. Meanwhile, Colleen sends over the bomber's information to the police, who track Derek down in his van and arrest him, preventing the second major attack. Colleen appreciates Stevens for his excellent performance. However, Stevens keeps requesting Colleen to send him back one last time and then shut off his body. Colleen feels compelled and decides to honor Stevens' last wish. She sends him back one last time after promising to shut his life support after 8 minutes. This time around, Stevens asks Christina out on a date. He then rushes to defuse the bomb. Meanwhile, in reality, Rutledge goes back on his words and decides to wipe Stevens' memory to reinitialize the source code, unaware that Colleen has sent him back and promised to disconnect his life support. In the source code, Stevens handcuffs Direct to a pole and reports him to the police. He then sends Colleen an email and calls his father under the guise of a fellow soldier, telling him how much he loves him. Meanwhile, Colleen approaches Stevens' body and prepares to disconnect its life support. Soon, Rutledge finds out about Colleen's secret activity and rushes to stop it. However, Colleen locks herself in the room with Stevens' body, not allowing Rutledge to enter. After 8 minutes, she disconnects Stevens' life support. To Stevens' surprise, the world around him in the source code continues to progress even after 8 minutes. He leaves the train and takes Christina on a date while immensely praising how perfect the day is, feeling gratitude towards life. Meanwhile, in an alternate reality, Colleen receives Stevens' email in which Stevens explains to her that source code is more than what she and Rutledge thought. It is not just a simulation, but rather a technology that allows a person to create alternate timelines and a whole new world. The film ends with Colleen approaching Stevens' body and reading his email from the alternate timeline in which Stevens tells her the competence of source code and asks her to send the waiting Captain Coulter Stevens on a mission. He adds that before sending him, let him know that everything is going to be okay. This movie has a rating of 7.5 on IMDb. The budget of this movie was around $31.9 million. At the box office, it earned $147.3 million. I hope you all liked this video. If yes, then make sure to like, comment, and most importantly subscribe to the channel for more movie recaps.